All right, we are into our remote learning phase, and during this time frame, we're going to be taking a look at the Vietnam War. And so, for those of you that have had Mr. Murphy before, I record my lectures, and today we're going to do a quick lecture, and I mean quick. It's going to be bing, bang, boom, and we'll be looking at um, how we got into Vietnam, why was Vietnam important, and then we'll have an assignment for you afterwards, along with a couple short video clips. So Vietnam, Southeast Asia, long, long ways away. How in the world does the United States get involved with it? First of all, let's give a little history about Vietnam. France got involved in the later part of the 1880s, 1884, 1885. They win a war against China and they take over Laos, Vietnam, and Cambodia. They go there to extract rice and rubber. It's to profit their economy. It's the classic example of colonialization. Big brother wants the cookie, so he just takes it from little brother. That's what the French do. They're stronger militarily than these people over there, and so they go and they take it. That works up until the point of World War II, and then we're going to see that change here a little bit. People that were very much opposed to the influx of the French coming in, they fled and they went to China in the early 1900s, and they began to organize and say, we really don't want these Frenchmen over here doing this to us. And a leader of that is going to be a guy by the name of Ho Chi Minh. Remember that name. Ho Chi Minh is very, very important. He's the leader of the communist group that will be in the north. Ho Chi Minh planned to create a Indochina Communist Party during the first part of 1920s, end of the teens in the Soviet Union. Then Russia, we saw communism come about. Communism is the idea that we all are in charge. No one is in charge. There is no government. The people have all the power. Sounds wonderful. In essence, your family is communist. You take what you need, you give what you can. Your dad does a lot more than your 4-year-old little brother. That's the idea of communism. Within communism, we have a group, or within Vietnam, we had a group, and this is going to be the tough part about Vietnam. You're going to have names, and you're going to have that you've never heard before, and it's going to be hard to pronounce, and you're going to have to remember what's the difference between the Viet Cong and the Viet Minh, and what's the difference between those guys and the North Vietnamese Army. We'll try to go through that here today and in the upcoming week. But the Viet Minh, when the Japanese came in 1940 and knocked France out, France left, and then was knocked out of the war. The Japanese took control of Vietnam, and then Ho Chi Minh had to go into hiding in Vietnam, and he had a resistance organization. And he named this the Viet Minh. At the end of World War II, when the Japanese had lost, the Viet Minh organization was more in the north, and they were supplied by the communists. And in the south, that was controlled more by the Allies, and Minh, who had been Ho Chi Minh, who had been wanting to have independence, declared independence for the region of Vietnam. The French, though, and the Allies said, no, I don't think so. And so what we end up having is the French will control the southern half of Vietnam. That's where most of their products that they were using, the rice and the rubber, were located. And then the communist and Ho Chi Minh will be in the north. The United States will go in and help France in the 1950s, in 1950, and we'll send a lot of money. And the reason we're sending this money is in 1949, China went communism. Okay, so you had the Soviet Union fall, and then you have the satellite countries fall in the 40s and early parts of the 50s. And the later part of 1949, China falls to communism, and suddenly the world looks vastly different in the eyes of the capitalist American. Suddenly you're looking out and saying, we have a group of people out there that are controlling most of Europe, Eastern Europe, and now a huge portion of Asia. And we have to put a stop to this because communism and capitalism do not go hand in hand. They don't work. So the United States will enter into this, and we'll start giving money. We'll get $15 million of aid. $15 million in 1950 is a good chunk of change to France to fight against the Viet Minh and Ho Chi Minh. Now, understand the Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh are woefully supplied compared to the French. Their weaponry, their ability to wage war is vastly under what the French can do. So 15 million is a lot of money. We'll spend almost $1 billion in aid to France and in Vietnam over the time frame of the early 1950s all the way until we're there. The reason we get involved in the 1950s, there was President Dwight Eisenhower, and during that time frame, the State Department came up with this theory, and the theory is called the domino theory. And countries are just like dominoes. Have you ever seen dominoes lined up and then you knock one over and then the next one goes, the next one, and then goes all the way along? We use that. So the idea was, if communism, the idea behind communism was it wasn't a country, it wasn't related to a country, much like radical Islamic terrorism. It is a worldwide revolution. So in communism, they weren't content with just saying, hey, we took over Russia or we took over Eastern Europe. No, it's a worldwide revolution. And America became aware of that in the 50s, and we'll have what's called the Cold War, which we just got out of. And we're going to stand up, and we're not going to let countries fall. So wherever communism comes about, this is the Truman Doctrine, and that we learned about in the Cold War. America will take a stand against communism. So in Southeast Asia, when the communists try to move into Indochina, we're going to give aid to it. In May of 1954, though, Ho Chi Minh is going to have a battle in a northern province called Dien Bien Phu. Dien Bien Phu is just an area. It's a place where the French will be defeated soundly, and the Viet Minh will behead about 1,000 French troops, and it will scare the living daylights out of the French. And the French will say, hey, this is not worth it, and we're out of here. We're leaving. Okay, so the French leave, and now you have nobody in the South except the South Vietnamese, and they need someone to come in and step in and help. So the UN steps in and declares, much like we are going to do in Korea, the United Nations will have a meeting between the communists and then the South Vietnamese and France, Great Britain, the United States, China. All those countries are going to be involved, and they decide they're going to set up along the 17th parallel what's called a demilitarized zone, which we'll see in just a second. And the demilitarized zone will say everything above the 17th parallel is northern, that is communist, and everything below it is capitalist, and that is democracy, and that's South Vietnam. In 1956, the U.S. will step in, and in 1956, the Geneva Accords called for countrywide elections, and the elections were going to decide who was going to control. Was it going to be the communists, or was it going to be the capitalists? And the leader of the capitalist group in South Vietnam was a gentleman by the name of Ngo Dinh. And Mr. Dinh, old Ngo, has a problem. He's good to the rich, he's good to his people, but not so much to the peasants and the majority of the people. America will have a very, very bad track record of oftentimes supporting leaders that might be good to us, but bad to their own people. So over a long period of time, whether you want to talk about Osama or Saddam Hussein, Mubarak in Egypt, Gaddafi in Libya, the Shah in Iran, Diem in South Vietnam. I mean, we've backed people that, again, are pretty good to the United States, but they lose the support of their own local people because they're poor to them. And that's what Diem's going to be. Diem is a corrupt leader. He doesn't give equality or land to the peasants by and large. And so Ho Chi Minh, who's underneath the theory of communism, again, communism, everybody owns the land. Everybody gets a piece of the land. It's great. Diem is a devout Catholic in an area that is predominantly 80% Buddhist. So the 20% is ruling over the 80%, and he does it with a very strong fisted manner. He will imprison and he'll beat, he'll cane, and this doesn't look good to the public. The Viet Cong will then start to wage war inside the South, a civil war within the South, and Dim's government will start assassinating people by the thousands. And again, if you're killing the enemy, that's one thing, but if you're killing randomly and you're killing villages, you're killing a lot of your own people, that doesn't play out well for the hearts and minds of the people. How in the world does the Viet Minh get supplied? We'll have a video on this here in a little bit. The Ho Chi Minh Trail. The Ho Chi Minh Trail is the communists of Soviet Union and China supplying the Viet Minh in South China. And when Kennedy, President Kennedy, this is 1960 now, will see this, Kennedy will now say, okay, we got to get involved. Because the last thing anybody in 1960 wants to see happen or but put around their neck is that you're soft on communism. That slogan has been put on the Democrats. It doesn't matter who runs for the Democratic Party. It doesn't matter whether it's Kennedy, or whether it's anybody after Truman, the Republicans always deem them as being soft on communism and soft on terrorism. And that has been something that has stuck against the Democrats for a long, long time. You do not want that label. Americans do not want to see us have another war, and so they are very much opposed to communism at this point in time. You have the same label given back to the Republican, that they don't care about the poor person, that they're, oftentimes you're labeled as the racist. It doesn't matter who's running for the next time for the Republican Party, they're going to have that label thrown out. It's been thrown out against Richard Nixon, Gerald Ford, every single candidate that's gone in there, Robert Dole, John McCain, they're all being labeled as that. And that's just something that has stuck. In this instance, Kennedy does not want to see that happen. But the more he supports Dim, the more Dim ends up causing more havoc and losing the hearts and minds of the people. By 1963, we're going to have 16,000 military advisors in South Vietnam. And that's going to change, though, because Kennedy will be killed in 1963 in what we've already talked about, and then President Johnson will come to power. Dim's popularity by 1963 has really, really moved in a negative area. And finally, the Kennedy administration had enough, and we had been keeping him protected. He started attacking the monks. He started imprisoning them and burning their temples, and then several monks and nuns will set themselves on fire, and the news media will see this and put this on news across the world, and Dim will be allowed to be taken out. It is, I saw when I was in college, I remember I saw the order by President Kennedy telling the CIA to basically not protect Dim anymore, and that the generals could carry out an assassination against them. And for $40,000, Mr. Dim, the president of South Vietnam, is now gone. We're going to have a new leader of South Vietnam, and then Kennedy is shot and killed. So here's a quick map of what Vietnam looks like. North Vietnam, again, is communist. South Vietnam is democracy. Saigon is the capital of the South Vietnam. That's in the very lower part. And then Hanoi, which will be changed to Ho Chi Minh after the war, is in the north. President Johnson, when he comes into office in 63, will vastly increase Americans' presence. In August of 1964, there is a proposed attack against the United States Navy in off the coast of the Sea of Japan, and where we're attacked. The U.S. destroyer is attacked by the name of USS Maddox. It's attacked supposedly by a torpedo launched by the North Vietnamese. I'm not sure how we're doing this, since the North Vietnamese don't really have a navy. So I'm not sure how we're going to get torpedo launched at us, but we fought and fired off many shells, and it was alleged and put in the paper, and then Johnson will use that to call for the Tonkin Gulf Resolution. The Tonkin Gulf Resolution was President Johnson asking Congress to permit him to go in and use the power of war against Vietnam. And Congress will overwhelmingly support it. And the operation will be called Operation Rolling Thunder. And remember, I said in 1963 we had, not very many. We had around 16,000. In 64, it goes to 23,000. But by 65, we're going to be into a whole bunch. We've got, what did we end up getting in there? Let me see. Yeah, by early part of 65, we've got 184,000 troops in Vietnam. By 1966, we got 385, and then by 1967, we've got 485. So giddy up, here we come, Vietnam. The war in this is vastly different than any other war we've ever had. It's hand-to-hand combat. It's very close-knit fighting. It's not seeing your enemy out in the open and taking him out. The Viet Minh will learn very early on that you don't want to fight against the American military. So it's your little brother throwing something at the big brother and then run like heck to his mom. That's what they're going to do to the Americans. They're going to come out with a sniper and they're going to fire 5 shots, and then they're going to go hide. And this is very frustrating because we can't ever get into a battle with the Viet Cong and the Viet Minh. It'll be a hit and run tactics they use. They know the terrain. They've got many tunnels throughout their region to get out, to jump into and then get away. They live within the civilian population. They're being supported by the civilian population. It's very humid. It's very dense. It doesn't bode well for us. General Westmoreland, who was in charge of all the troops, said the way we're going to win this war is we're going to win this war by wearing them down. We're bigger, stronger. We're just going to beat the crap out of our enemy, and it's going to be a war of attrition. And the war of attrition will just be, we're going to introduce every day how we're going to have a body count. And every day you'd see how many enemies that we'd kill. And after a while, he felt like the Viet Cong would say, okay, enough is enough. We're getting crushed. Well, they never said enough. They kept coming and kept coming and kept coming. And that was tough. That was really tough. So we're going to introduce the idea that we were going to, along with that, we're also going to introduce the idea of we're going to win the hearts and minds of the people of the South now that we've got Dim out. Dim has been kicked out, and now we're going to win these people's support, and so they'll start telling us who these infiltrators are. At the same time, we're going to start using things like napalm in jungles where we will suspect where the enemy's at, and we'll just drop these bombs from our bombers, and they're a gel, and when they hit oxygen, it ignites. And then we'll also use what's called Agent Orange, which is it's just basically Roundup on steroids, and we'll spray that all over the jungle, and it'll kill everything, and then we'll be able to find the enemy easier. Nothing says like I love your hearts and minds, people, like napalm and Agent Orange. So let's take a look here. We got just a little bit more. One of the things we're going to do to meet the enemy is we're going to go out and do these what we call search and destroy missions. We'll go out and we'll try to find the enemy, and we'll go out in small groups, platoons, 15, 18 people, and we will look for the enemy, and when we find them, we'll attack them. This is not going to go overly well for us. We're still going to be winning the war. We're beating the opponent down, but we're not winning it in decisive. It's not happening quick enough. And why are we not beating these guys? We're vastly superior to them in training and in every kind of equipment. Why are we not able to knock down their morale? Soldiers during Vietnam, we're going to loosen the reins, and we're going to allow soldiers to do things that we had never done before. Strict disciplinarian military rules are going to be suspended, and that's going to be something that we'll learn from, that we'll never have happen again. You're going to see guys come back to the barracks after being out looking for the enemy, and they're going to be allowed to do things that today you're not going to have that on base. You're not going to have a bunch of drinking and drugs involved. You're not going to have shirts untucked. You're not going to have people with long hair. Everyone looks the same in the Army. You look, talk, breathe, everything the same in the U.S. military. We learned that from Vietnam. South Vietnam, as we're mentioning, has their own civil war at the same time going on between the Buddhists and the monks and the Buddhists against the Catholics, and it's just we lost the people. We're going to lose the people. Um, this is going to cause us back home to become frustrated because our economy, whenever you go to war, it costs a lot of money, and it's going to cost a lot of money to be in war, and where our economy is going to suffer at home. And it's also going to be where something where we let the media have a lot of room to roam in Vietnam, and Ward and June Cleaver don't really want to see on their TV during dinner time some guy being mangled and shot up and blood all over the place. That doesn't look good when you're having dinner time. So living room war was something, again, we're not going to have that happen. And President Reagan did not allow the media to have free reign when we were at war in Desert Storm. They kept them out, and because war's hell, and in war you kill people. One of the big things we'll talk about in the next section is the ability for our people to trust our government, and we'll talk about that more here in a little bit. So I'm going to stop right there, and we'll move forward. Now you're going to answer these questions off to the side.